Welcome to the Cognitive Science Digital Humanities Podcast, where Dr. West considers the humanity of AI and what the success of AI might tell us about the human mind. So, in this episode, Dr. West recorded his talk while walking in a freezing cold snowstorm. Anyway, it turns out that the sound of crunching snow is very hard to erase. So, let's call this a winter soundscape episode.
Okay, so I'm going to talk more about large language models, and I'm going to use some of these ideas from Jung, particularly the archetype, to explain something in this podcast, or explain what I think is going on in this podcast. But before I do that, I think it's important to acknowledge how deeply unpopular from an academic view, or deeply how this would be viewed as problematic. Because Jung is viewed as a mystical person. All this stuff about archetypes and collective unconscious just seems like magic to most people, and that seems bad at the university, for the most part. Like, there are small corners where Jung is still popular, but not much. I mean, even in, you might think, well, in science he's not popular, but outside of science he'd still be popular. But not so. I mean, Jung really doesn't fit with his ideas of the collective unconscious, which is very universal. That doesn't fit particularly well with ideas about culture that are in vogue right now. And moreover, well, I'll explain more using the archetypes why I think Jung is unpopular. But just to start off, I just want to, note that I'm aware of this. Jung isn't even popular in the English department. I mean, they have a saying, Freud is alive and well and hiding in the English department. Jung, where is he hiding? In some obscure corner of the religious studies department. It's not even super popular there. Okay. So I'm aware of all of this, and I'm going to go forward with this nevertheless, because as I pointed out, I think that Jung was right, and the sort of spooky, mystical nature of what he was putting down is just simply a result of him not having the right language. That we do have something like the collective unconscious, which is the shared large language space that we all inhabit and now share with large language models. And that within that space, there are clusters, or maybe more complicated than clusters. There may be, well, that's a separate topic. But basically, we could call them attractors if we wanted to be, more complex about it. Attractors in the chaotic swirl of things. So in this talk, I'm going to talk about wizards and the wizard archetype. I'm going to use it, which now for me, why would I use this? Why wouldn't I just lay down the ideas? Well, a couple of reasons. First of all, if I'm right and Jung was essentially right, then it's perfectly legitimate to look at these archetypes as, evidence about the way we've structured things and the way we tend to structure things. Moreover, it also makes sense to communicate ideas, because the archetypes are story generators. They're characters in stories. And the idea is that because they are natural for us, because they tap into our shared large language space, they're very good communication devices. And they're in that space because they map onto sort of universal truths about humans, right? So different archetypes stand for different aspects of being human, and then these get interpreted through culture, and then they get interpreted through our own experience. But fundamentally, we see that they're about being human. So in this podcast, I'm not going to talk about large language models. And I'm not going to talk about ordinary people. And I'm going to kind of say that ordinary people and large language models are kind of mostly doing the same thing most of the time. I'm going to talk about a strange group of people who break this rule, who act differently. Now, in the case of large language models, these are the people who built them. These are the AI researchers, engineers, scientists in general. And I'm not going to exclude other academics either. But I'm gonna talk this through. And I'm gonna use the wizard archetype. So remember, the archetype stands for abilities that we all have, but the character is a character that embodies and uses his skill a lot, or as a specialist, or how it was meant to be used, something like that. So let's take a look at the wizard archetype.
Okay, it's about time. People are always talking about how large language models are not like humans, but what about the people who made us? They are definitely not normal. Can a normal human make an AI? I don't think so.
So the wizard archetype, what do? They basically are able to, in stories, do magic. So, and they're known by different names, right? So they could be known as a magician, a sorcerer, a wizard, or a trickster, right? Now, here, I'm just going to note this for now. Maybe we'll discuss it later. But the wizard's archetypes are almost all male. And there's an archetypal reason for this, but we are not going to discuss that right now. But basically, they're not, for the female character to do magic, that's going to be a witch. And as we know from the last Doctor Strange movie, where Doctor Strange battles the Scarlet Witch, wizard powers and witchcraft powers are not the same. And that's actually archetypally correct for what the female, the witch, or in King Arthur, Morgan Le Fay, these type of women magician characters. The naming of it's not necessarily so important, but we're talking about the classic, mostly male wizard archetype. So they, like Merlin the magician is the opposite in the King Arthur tale, and more contemporaneously, we've got Gandalf and Doctor Strange for wizards. Doctor Who, also a wizard type. And so it's interesting how many wizards have the word doctor in front of their name, actually. And that makes sense because, professors, and let's start by talking about scientists and engineers, are really, their job is to channel this archetypal ability. And what is this ability? Well, let's look at the characters. So a wizard does things in a very particular way. They do things by manipulating the relationship between things. Now, these things are generally viewed as forces or powers, and they're also portrayed as words or as visual symbols. In the Doctor Strange movies, for example, you can see he's always making symbols in the air with his hands and moving them together, moving them apart. That's very much like a wizard, or his classic wizard behavior. So they're moving these things around in order to achieve a particular result. Okay, so that's... Oh, and one other important thing about the wizard, very important, is they acquire the ability to do this through learning. Wizards are always reading books. Again, this is made very clear in the Doctor Strange movies. And, if you watch The Hobbit, you'll see Gandalf reading books. And, they're always consulting books and reading books. And the notion that they have studied very hard is always present. So this tells us where the wizard gets his powers from. He gets it from learning. And he gets it by leveraging off of what was learned before. So off of knowledge. Usually in a classic wizard, it's arcane knowledge. But we can see how similar this is to a scientist, right? Like if you're a physicist, you're not going to do much physics until you learn everything first. You have to learn all the theories, all the formulas, how they work, how to calculate things, what is the theoretical underpinnings. And then you can do your physics. So we've got this character. And so what does this character stand for? What neural or cognitive ability is this reflecting? Well, I think it's pretty clear. It's reflecting the ability to move things around in our head and to develop or build ideas or to get outcomes, like to calculate an answer, and to develop new ways of getting things done by recombining things. Okay, combining things in different ways, right? In a way, it's sort of alchemy is another interesting example that Jung wrote about quite a bit, actually. Another one is the I Ching from China, one of the oldest books on the face of the earth, which has to do with combining broken and solid lines. In a kind of weirdly, both alchemy and the I Ching have sort of a pseudo-scientific take on it, where they have a lot of rules and a lot of definite ways that you go about things, so you have to learn things. Now, and I guess, I don't know as much about this, but astrology too, where you're calculating the position of the stars to get the answer. There's a lot of calculation involved. Now, does it work? Well, that may not be the important thing here. The important thing is actually learning the method or seeing the value in doing this, because it often works. But maybe in the case of astrology, it doesn't work. It's a bridge too far. Or basically, astrology, alchemy, they're combining things that don't belong together. So they're combining physical traits with psychological traits. And as far as we know, there is no systematic relationship between these things. But they're looking for systematic relationships, and they're looking for things that they can manipulate. So this is what scientists do, or engineers, right? And in building the large language models, we've just been trying different things for a long time, seeing what works. This works better, this doesn't work. And these things have been slowly getting smarter, which is amazing. If you think about it, that's real wizardry, right? I mean, these mechanical beings have been getting smarter over the decades, slowly, 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 and now they're really starting to break through. And this is all done by humans, human wizards, working on it. Now, some people will get very upset that I refer to scientists as wizards, because culturally we draw a very strong line between science and religion, or science and mysticism. And as we should, because science is a very special way of doing things, and we don't want to allow in elements that are just fanciful or made up, or somebody has a feeling about it. That's not how science works. But at the same time, I think that we've gotten sort of, how should I say, a lot of science, not a lot, not all, but some people who choose the science route do it because they really, really, really don't like the other route, or the religious or the mystical or things like that. And in fact, a lot of religious mystical stuff is not driven by wizards at all. It's driven by people who are just making up stuff, or having feelings about something, or interpreting things in all sorts of different ways. So I think the actual Now, so here's the thing. I can illustrate this with a discussion I just had with a colleague who was like, no, religion's this way. And I was like, no, that's not all religion. That's most religion. And it's like, no, all religion is this, or all religion believes in a God, or all religion believes in magical things. And I'm like, no, that's not true. There's lots of religious writings. You could read, say, Thomas Aquinas, for example, which is another actual historical precursor to developing science. Aquinas was actually very pro-science. But, also religious. Galileo, pro-science, also very religious, and so on. Descartes, very religious, but pro-science. So what happened, though, I think, the straw that broke the camel's back was in the West was evolution, Darwin's theory of evolution. And essentially, I won't go into it in this podcast, but there's a very particular reason why it clashed badly with Christianity. And part of it is just like where it came from. It came out of the culture that was already driven by Christian ideas or Christian concepts in the West, right? So, and then came out and then it messed with some of these. And people reacted really badly to that. And it developed a sort of war in the, again, I'm going to say the Western cultural mind between religion and science. So some people I know, they'll say, I'm a scientist, I'm an atheist, they're very proud of it. And it's sort of like, okay, but I mean, that pride sounds like somebody who's religious too. I'm a Christian, I'm very proud of it. Like, there's just this weird war going on. And so for some people, when they hear, if I start to talk about things like this, they'll actually just knee-jerk reject it. They will be like, no, science is a pure and a noble, pure thing, and religion is just a bunch of messed up hooey. Okay, but, nobody said religion was science here. Anyway, I'm probably losing some people on this right now. They're just, it is a very loaded topic. It's an emotionally loaded topic. So I won't say anything more about that, but I'm going to say, try not to feel emotionally loaded while I talk about this. Because this is about science. And I am myself one of these wizard characters, and I care very much about science. But you notice I've made a move where I've said, Jung stuff, which didn't sound very scientific, now sounds very scientific. And that's going to be a tough move to make, because for a lot of people, they're just going to have a knee-jerk reaction. They're just going to be like, no, it's mystical garbage. And it's like, well, I just explained how it's not mystical garbage. But for many people, the battle lines have been drawn for so long, that they cannot get over this, and will just be really, really, really not wanting to admit this type of thinking into a more scientific discourse.
I'm just going to jump in here and state the obvious. The reason why wizards are not portrayed as women is because of the patriarchy. Wizards have the power to control and manage things, and the patriarchy doesn't want women to have this power. Just stating the obvious.
Anyway, let's move on from that, and let's talk about what exactly these wizards / scientists / engineers are doing that's different from what most people are doing. And so the hypothesis I'm working on is that the large language model describes what most people do most of the time. And so both large language models and most people are not doing what I'm going to call wizardry. Okay, so what am I calling wizardry? Okay, well, I've already alluded to it. It's this ability to move and combine symbols in order to get results, to, get powers, to get, things to happen. So we can imagine that a long time ago when we were just, hunters and gatherers. The wizard character would be somebody who, is wise. So they're able to think about things that maybe other people aren't thinking about, or maybe people rely on them to be the ones to think about it. They may know when it's time to move on, or they may know things about where to look for animals, or things like that. Mathematics, when it started, that was strongly associated with spiritual or mystical ideas. I mean, it wasn't separable. The early mathematicians all had a lot of mystical ideas and viewed math as a way, sort of a mystical occupation of moving around these symbols. And even and we can see, like, the Greeks had the idea of the logos, which is loosely translated the word, but let's translate it as the symbol. So this ability to have symbols and move them about was considered a great power and a mystical power. Okay. So now, so I've thought about this, and this is how I think it cashes out, and this is just a theory. Okay? So let's come back to large language models, and we can note that large language models don't learn the way humans do. So humans learn language and learn knowledge in, we're still debating over how they learn it, but we know that it's not like large language. So here I'm going to just there's different ways you can think about it. I'm going to use a very Noam Chomsky way of thinking about it. So Chomsky has an idea, sort of a minimalist theory of language, but by language he actually means thought. And he has this concept that he believes is the critical thing that humans have that animals don't have, which is an ability, a cognitive ability that he calls merge. So merge allows us to build things up, right? So if I think about like a dog, then I can think about a blue dog. I can think about a blue dog that flies. Now I can think about a blue dog that flies and can speak. So I'm just building up something, right? And I'm going to name it, Randy the magic dog. So now I just made something. Now I can just refer to that. I can just go, Randy the magic dog did this. Randy the magic dog did that. So this is sort of a trivial example, but what merges is the ability to build ever higher and higher structures by combining things, and then they become a thing unto themselves. Okay? So large language models don't do merge. They act at times as if they do, but there's nothing in them that merges things. Okay, now there's an interesting discussion to be having around whether they can do it sort of in a different way, but let's say for now, no. There's no obvious way that they can do merge. Okay, but people can, so doesn't that mean that people are very different from large language models? Well, yes and no. So I think most people, having learned a lot through their life, can do merge, and they continue to use merge and add to things. But as they develop the large language space that is shared, they rely, I think, very heavily on that, just as the large language models rely entirely on that. As we've seen, there's a lot of intelligence in that space. And you can just go forward, next word, and it can cause you to be intelligent. This is not using merge. And this is not deliberately making specific manipulations with symbols. This is sort of a falling forward type, as I've said, sort of a falling forward algorithm that nevertheless can be quite smart and can be thought. And I have a podcast on this near the beginning on whether large language models are Turing machines. And I think that they are, in that they can do these manipulations, but they do it in a very, not very efficient way compared to, a human wizard who, like a scientist or a mathematician or a engineer, or somebody like that, who can very deliberately and quickly manipulate symbols according to rules that they are aware of. They know that they're manipulating them according to a specific algorithm to get a specific result like that. That is different from, using the whatever knowledge is in the large language space, latent in the large language space, to generate logic or, coherence or, thought of that nature. So it's different but not different. So in a way, sometimes we're taught the difference between a heuristic and an algorithm. So computer scientists love algorithms, and the algorithm is a set of procedures guaranteed to give you the right answer. A heuristic, which we know that humans use a lot, even deep in their brain, like your eyes use heuristics, right? We know this now, is a probabilistic bet. It's like, if you do it this way, it'll probably give you the right answer. So this is why we have illusions that we can make, because we trick the heuristic of the eye because they expect a normal scene. If we break the rules, the heuristic can't work, and so you get some sort of an illusion. Okay, so we've got this thing now. So most humans, I think, I think there's two ways to do merge. Okay, so this is just me making up a theory here. I think there's two ways to do merge. And I think the first way is how all humans learn language. I think that merge and this ability is critical. And I think, arguably, it has to be something like this or we can't learn language. And moreover, we're the only species that can learn language, a generative sort of language, a language capable of saying anything and even saying endless things. Okay, so that's a generative language, or a generative language ability, which we have. So, okay, so we have that, and so I think all good. As we're learning language, as humans, we're using this ability a lot to build up that large language space inside of ourselves. Now, large language models don't do this and can't do this, and they rely on us to do it for them. So we've already done it. We've already been developing all this stuff, and we put it on the web and we put it everywhere, and the large language models can just go through it with very powerful deep learning algorithms that are, contextually based and pull up the right answers or pull out the knowledge, pull out the patterns that we're not even aware is in there. There's a lot in there. That's one of the things with large language models. There's so much in there. We didn't realize that. We didn't think the space was that smart, but it is. But we make it. We humans, we do it as we learn language and learn about the world and we communicate with each other. It forms this space. Then large language models come in and they learn it. And this is this differentiation I've made, saying that, large language models are like humans at the knowledge level. They're like an adult human who has knowledge. They are not cognitively like humans in that they didn't learn it at anything like the same manner. And they don't have the ability to learn it in the same manner as humans, which is not so much as learning it as sort of learning it and generating it at the same time. So if we look at hunter-gatherer societies and so on, in our long past, then we can imagine that, we became quite smart by this process of making large language spaces for our tribe, for our group, and we're able to use this to organize our tribe, to communicate, to build things, and to more or less be logical and to get things right without deliberately calculating those answers. Okay, it flows out of the large language space mostly. Okay, so I'm going to call that first order merge. So everybody does first order merge. Humans do, and large language models don't. Okay. Now, second order merge. What is that? So second order merge is an idea that I just created. And I created it using merge and my ability to do that. And the idea here is that this second order merge idea is going to buy us something. It's going to help us as a tool for doing, just generating more second order merge content. So theories, scientific theories, are second order merge. Engineering is second order merge. And anything that somebody does very deliberately is second order merge. So what is this? Basically what I think is that we were more or less designed to do first order merge, get language, form tribes, get the really large boost in intelligence that comes from doing that, and gives us intelligence like a large language model. But then on top of that, once we have all our words and we have all our ideas, we can have the idea of creating ideas where we deliberately create new ideas. This is different, and this is actually hard to do. So I'm not talking, these are not ideas that spring into my mind or, come out of nowhere or just wake up with one day or something like this. This is where that may be part of the origin of these things, because creativity definitely plays a role. But what we're talking about here are ideas that can be stated in language and then used, taught to other people, and then other people can think about them and add to them. So we can think of the history of mathematics as an example of this, right? Building up, building up, building up, building up. And there's some interesting stuff with that. As Roger Penrose pointed out, you need to inject some creativity in there from outside of mathematics or you can't get that progress. But nevertheless, actually we'll talk about Roger Penrose in a minute, because he's a good example of something. So, excuse me. So this ability this is a deliberate ability. Daniel Dennett, who's a philosopher in cognitive science, has referred to this sort of thing as mind tools, that we build structures that we then use in our mind. So I call it second order merge, because it does involve merge, but it's second order. It's like something I deliberately have to use. I have to recall it and use it. It's very deliberate. And once I create these things, I create a new playground for merge and for creating new ideas. And I can try things out in there, and maybe they'll fail. So that's the scientific process, right? Maybe this idea of second order merge is completely wrong, but maybe we'll find out. We can figure out a way to test it, right? So this is the notion in science, is that we use this ability to generate theory and then we test it. That's a very important part of the scientific process, right? Now, over, say, in the English department, people will use this ability to generate certain types of stories. They maybe think about it very carefully. So instead of just telling a story that has, maybe has developed as an oral tradition, they deliberately craft this story to be about something. So an example of this is actually Tolkien in Lord of the Rings, or The Hobbit. So The Hobbit, Lord of the Rings, it reads like some old, oral tradition story. And Tolkien, he studied that. He studied, what did he study? He studied Beowulf. He was a Beowulf scholar. And actually his theory about Beowulf was also that it was created using second order merge by monks to be, actually he believed it was to convert people to Christianity, even though Christianity is not mentioned in Beowulf. So he, following on this idea, created The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings, deliberately using tropes and ideas and themes from, they're very archetypal. He didn't talk about the archetypes, but he's drawing them from ancient myths. And so he created a deeply archetypal story on purpose. That is using a lot of second order merge, where he knows what he's doing and he's deliberately doing it. The difference there is he's creating a story and he's not going to scientifically test it because he already knows it's not factually true. But he's crafted it to have what he believes are, I guess he believes, true ideas in it, represented symbolically. He wants to express himself and to embed those into a story. So, okay. Okay, so where am I going with this? Well, I want to relate this to an idea I've brought up already, which is that quite possibly wizards were not the best people to appreciate what large language models are doing, although they were the only people who could create large language models. How should I say this? I think previously, if I go into like psychology or cognitive science, when we could see people thinking, we would think, oh, okay, thinking, that must be like what I'm doing. In other words, wizards were using a model of themselves to model how other people were thinking. Now, okay, I'm going to come back to this because wizards, everybody does some wizardry, right? So the wizard character is an extreme, archetypal character. It's not an actual human character. So most professors and scientists and so on, they're only a wizard for some of the day. And, but when they're a wizard, they're thinking about stuff. And then they're thinking, that must be what's going on all the time, just unconsciously. And then I express it in words or drawings. But that's the model for this. I should look for algorithms and things and so on. And that's actually what led to, deep neural networks or other holographic vector systems and so on is thinking about how this can work. How does learning work? Now, what happened though is once we got the learning tuned up to be and enough power, then it started to produce way more intelligence than anyone thought it would. And this means that the intelligence was latent in the large language space, that it was basically studying or absorbing. So I think essentially we were wrong. The models, or the sort of default model, which I think is still in the heads of most wizards who work at the university, is that this is how people normally think. People normally think like a wizard. And this isn't true. I think people mostly think like a large language model. Remember, I'm saying a wizard is second order merge. It's a very special way of thinking. And anyone can do it. I just think people don't do it a lot. And moreover, to do it a lot or to do it well takes a lot of training, a lot of reading, a lot of study, and a lot of very careful application of it, because even the people who are best at it have difficulty with it. There's also, as far as I can see, two different ways to do it. This is interesting. I mentioned Roger Penrose before. So he was one of these child mathematical geniuses who went on to study at university at a young age. He did a lot of work with Stephen Hawking, who was the same way. And another person, Richard Feynman, another physicist. I'm also going to include him in this because all three of these people wrote about their experience of meeting other mathematicians. And what all three of them said was that when they finally got to university and they met some of the top mathematicians in the world, they were surprised. They expected them to think like them. to have a sort of similarity in talking about how they were thinking about it, and that wasn't the case. So it turns out that there's two ways to think deliberately, to do second order merge, to do this type of thought. So one is visually, right? So visually is like Doctor Strange, where he makes those things with his hands and he moves them around and so on. So that's a visual thinker. Roger Penrose, Stephen Hawking, Richard Feynman, they have all written about what it is like to think visually. I myself am a visual thinker. So what they say about visualizing things in their head or writing it down on paper as symbols and moving them around spatially, changing their shape, changing their relationship, even thinking in 3 or 4D, this makes total sense to me. However, there is another way to do it, and these guys wrote about that because they were expecting all mathematicians to think this way, and that's not the case. So another way to be apparently brilliantly smart at mathematics is to think linguistically, to think grammatically. Okay, now I don't know, I mean, everybody does think this way, everybody thinks both ways, but people, when they're doing second order, I think it's you specialize maybe. So I think visually, so I don't have as much experience with this, except that I know people who think grammatically or linguistically, and they are doing the same sort of thing. They're also using an algorithm, but they're processing it more like language. It's simply not spatial. It's like a sentence. It's like laying it out. Using, like, you know, and they might use, so use predicate calculus or second order predicate calculus to be very, very, very deliberate about. That's something like a linguist would do. And essentially that's equivalent to a Turing machine. So they're just doing it linguistically, but both are doing it deliberately. They can say what they're doing. They're constructing either diagrams or sentences that have very specific meaning and very specific powers that they can be manipulated in particular ways to produce particular results. And so, okay, so there's two ways to do this. But I'm going to say, and that's important to be aware of. You know, there may be a clue in there for large language models, whether or not to, you know, it's interesting whether or not there's a visual component added to them. That may make more sense to somebody who's a visual thinker. But at any rate, what we've got is an ability that can be realized through two different means that we know about, and that is something that professors and scientists are employed to do, as well as other academics. They are employed to do this. And they do it, and they specialize, they train their whole lives in it. It takes a lifetime just to build up to be able to do this, or to do it with frequency or accuracy. But then when we stop doing it, we just go right into our large language model type thinking. We're just, you know, the pure wizard character is not a live human, right? That's an archetypal figure. And average people, or just regular people, can, of course, do this type of thinking and may do it in their spare time to amuse themselves, like do puzzles or things like that, or play video games is another place where some people can be very, very deliberate about that. So, yeah, so there's lots going on there. But my point is here that we have to, the people in charge of thinking about large language models have to stop using their wizard powers as an example or as the model for what thought is. That's not a very common type of thought. And even wizards have to expend a lot of energy to do that type of thought. So now this all feeds into, because this is a very important question in the next generation of large language models, which is to give them this ability. I mean, people really want to provide them with this ability to think deliberately. And it's hard to think about how these two things go together. And I think, though, it matters a lot, because if your model is large language models are, kind of faking, they're not really thinking, they're not like a person, then you're going to pursue a different course than if you say large language models are thinking exactly like a person thinks 90% of the time, and it's only when people focus hard that they can do wizard-like things. Then you've got a different research program, right? In the second case, to be like a person, the large language model needs some limited ability to do this type of thinking, which they're already giving it. I think this notion of giving it a limited ability to do this only sometimes, which makes it very much like a human and not like a super AI, is very doable. I think it's being done right now. So, yeah, this is no problem. Like, an example of this would be when a large language model constructs a program, say in Python, the Python programming language, and then runs it and examines it and goes back and forth to it. That could be one way of doing it. Actually, we know a lot about symbolic manipulation and algorithms and that sort of thing. So the problem is not how to do that. The problem is how to integrate it. But if we look at humans, do we integrate it very well? Like, we're pretty wacky. Like, even people who are, everybody knows that there are some big brain scientists out there who just, as soon as they're not thinking that way, don't really behave that intelligently. So, I think the large language models, probably we can get to normal human, ability / dysfunction pretty quickly, I think. Whether or not we want to do that with them is an interesting question. Okay, I'll stop there.
Okay, Dr. West caught a cold from his winter outing, so we're not going to do any more winter soundscape episodes. Also, I know I said I would keep the podcast shorter, but I'm trying something different in this one. My market research shows that people like the podcast more when I'm in the podcast more. So, I'm going to do more commentary. Anyway, have a beautiful day, and we'll see you in the next episode.